Hello, world singers. My name is Brooke.
And I'm Tyler.
And this is Cosmere Conversations.
Welcome back for another episode. Good to have you all with us. We are continuing our Oathbringer breakdown, what will likely continue for the rest of the new year, which is 2018. Happy New Year to you all.
Wait, the whole year?
Yeah, we're just going to keep talking. Well,
just Oathbringer?
We don't get any more Stormlight Archive this year.
Oh, man.
It's
yeah,
a year off
I
at
know.
least, and
so
probably
sad.
2. So we gotta just
no Cosmere, actually. No Cosmere.
Except for White
Sand.
Except
for, the White Sand graphic novel we're going to get in February. And then we're just in like a Cosmere drought, friends.
Isn't there a possibility of Book 4, Mistborn Era 2, coming out later in the year? Or is that
No, I don't think so.
predicted?
Yeah, I think 2019.
All right, well, maybe Brandon will give us one of the magical writing surprises and release
Totally
something
possible.
early.
Yeah.
But for today, we have a look at everybody's favorite world hopper, mystery of the Cosmere, multi-named friend, possibly foe,
Ooh.
Hoid.
We're going to look at some of the new things that we learned about Hoid and Oathbringer, as well as take an in-depth look at the letters that we get in Part 2 epigraphs.
And let's begin by saying that we did already do a episode, I believe it was episode 4, on Hoid and his appearances across the Cosmere. So if you're looking for just more of like the general where has Hoid appeared and the first round of letters that we got from Way of Kings, Words of Radiance, and that can be found in episode 4. This episode, we're really just going to be focusing on what we saw from Hoid in Oathbringer, which was quite a bit. I mean, I was pretty happy and shocked at the same time for how much Hoid we had.
Me too. We got so much new info. And the letters were super interesting. So let's go ahead and dive right in.
So what we are kind of planning on doing is looking at each of the letters and then kind of speculating about them individually and pulling out any important aspects of those letters.
Yeah, they're full of a lot of little interesting tidbits.
And as Brooke said, this is all from the epigraphs of Part 2 in Oathbringer. Do you just want to kind of go through line by line and we'll kind of stop and talk about the interesting stuff as it comes up?
Yeah, sounds good.
Excellent. So it begins, letter 1, with Dearest Cephandrius. And Cephandrius is the name first mentioned by Preservation in reference to Hoid. It seems to be that Cephandrius is the name that the other shards, or the other vessels, I should say, refer to Hoid as.
Yeah, we know from Brandon that Cephandrius is the oldest known name of Hoid. I think he said it's about a century off from his like original name, but it's the oldest one that we know of so far.
And we can kind of speculate that just the use of this name points back to the sender being someone who was around at the Shattering and probably knew Hoid from that time period. And so we expect that anytime you hear someone using the name Cephandrius, it's likely a shard and or vessel. Yeah,
and or just someone like really old who's kind of in the big game.
Yes, the big Cosmere game that Hoid is playing at.
Yeah.
So that's how it begins.
So exciting.
And then the letter continues. I received your communication, of course. I noticed its arrival immediately, just as I noticed your many intrusions into my land. You think yourself so clever, but my eyes are not those of some petty noble, to be clouded by a false nose and some dirt on the cheeks. Referencing, of course, the fact that Hoid often disguises himself as a beggar, especially when he is infiltrating some fancy Light Eyes party or some of the nobles over on Scadrial, whatnot.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting that this person, whoever's writing this letter, is like really calling out Hoid, and saying like, you think you're so sneaky, but like you are a child, basically.
Do you want to continue the letter as the author, we don't know, he or she, continues to call out Hoid?
Yeah, letter continues. You mustn't worry yourself about Reza. It is a pity about Aona and Sky, but they were foolish, violating our pact from the very beginning.
I think that's just important to remind everyone. Aona and Sky are the vessel's name of the shards, Devotion and Dominion.
Yeah, on Cell.
And we know that they were the first victims of Odium before he arrived in the Risharian system. We've talked about that, Magic on Selen Nalthus, episode 9, but it is clear that this, we believe, vessel or shard knows about the death of these two vessels.
Yeah, and this attitude of like not worried about Odium, not really sympathetic at all towards Aona and Sky, right? Just kind of like these things that I feel like as a whole have been sort of looking at as, Reza is bad, he needs to be stopped. Devotion and Dominion, like, so sad, they got destroyed. And this person writing the letter is kind of like not along those lines at all.
And what I also think is interesting about that idea is that it kind of gives a hint to the eventual reveal of Odium as not the supreme evil that we kind of imagined. We talked about this in our last episode. It was definitely surprising how Odium appeared and the idea of being more passion than just hatred. So that's obviously something that a vessel and shard would know about. And so maybe this is a hint that either not all the vessels see Odium as a bad thing, or that there is even some kind of, not disrespect, but just kind of like, you're one of 16 and all the powers of the shards are basically equal, and so why would one shard worry all that much about another?
Well, but I think they're not equal anymore.
I agree.
Yeah.
I think that this is faulty logic from the person who is writing, but I think that that is where the attitude could maybe come from. Sure. About why you could be dismissive of Odium. It's just like, he's one of 16. He's not anything more important or significant than I am, or not a threat to me in any way because the powers are equal. Think about
if this is written by a shard.
Yes, and I'm just guessing on that based on the name Cephandrius, so it totally could be wrong, but...
Yeah, especially because it does say our pact, violating our pact from the very beginning, while he is talking about shards. So that does seem to indicate that the writer is a shard as well. But I think you make a great point of this introducing some doubt into the equation for the reader, and kind of one of those moments where you start to question what you know, as I think we all need to do in the Cosmere all the time, because like with the reveals in Oathbringer, like with the reversal at the end of Mistborn, this is one of my favorite themes that Brandon deals with, is like misinformation and disillusionment, and like what can you really believe about what you're being told. So for me, this does introduce like a question of like, what if Hoid is wrong? Like, what if Hoid is totally overreacting? Or what if, in the grand scheme of things, Reza is actually not that big of a deal. He's pretty small in the scale of the whole Cosmere, which is also, I think, what this is showing, because if you're a shard and you have that kind of cosmic vision that, a deity would have, those small things just seem so much more insignificant than it does for, the humans who are on the surface of Rashar.
And I think this next part in the letter is going to play into that idea as well. So continuing with the letter, your skills are admirable, but you are merely a man. You had your chance to be more and refused it. that is referencing something that we have heard about before in regards to Hoid, is that at some point in the past, he had the opportunity to become a shard, or to pick up a shard and kind of elevate his power, but refused to, and we don't know when that happened. It does not seem likely that there was any type of Hoid trying to intersect in preservation or ruin demise.
No, I think it's talking about the shattering.
Yeah, I think so as well. I just wanted, like, these times when the shards die or are, hurt by odium is also an opportunity we saw from the people of the Eyrie, who it's an opportunity to take the shard for yourself from that other vessel. So I don't think it was one of those instances of devotion or dominion dying and Hoid like standing in the background.
Yeah, because it says like he refused it, not that he like chose not to go after it, but that like he had total opportunity to do it easily and like decided not to. It's not like, oh, he went after it and then like lost it or anything like that.
As you were saying, though, about maybe Hoid being wrong, this kind of slap down insult of "you are merely a man," I think is something that is recurring over and over and over again throughout the Cosmere. Whenever we have interactions between mortals and the shards, whether that's Kelsier and preservation, or Vin and ruin, or Dalinar and odium, there's always a moment that is seen in each of those interactions when either out of like anger or kindness or something, out of something, the shards are like, you don't really see the whole picture. Let me show you what's going on. And they like give the sight or the power of their shard to a moment to one of these mortals. Odium does it to Dalinar in Oathbringer, and Dalinar is completely overwhelmed by it. Then sees ruin. Kelsier sees preservation. Like, you have all these moments of just like the mortals realizing how small and insignificant they are in comparison. But then when it comes to someone like Kelsier, he basically says like, I don't care. And he sees a fault in preservation that like gives him confidence. And so I think that's interesting to keep in mind too, is like the shards are much more significant and are playing on this different cosmic level, but it doesn't mean that they are completely without fault.
Yeah, I mean, we know they're fallible. Obviously, they can die and make mistakes. But I think exactly what you're saying is even more significant when it's Hoid, because I think we're used to seeing Hoid as being more powerful, more knowledgeable than the rest of the humans. And so to then realize that in relation to the shards, he doesn't know anything, is much less powerful, to hear him like spoken of in that way is an interesting, different perspective.
So let's continue with the letter. No good can come of two shards settling in one location. It was agreed that we would not interfere with one another, and it disappoints me that so few of the shards have kept to this original agreement. Very significant line.
Yeah, so much information.
You have a type of agreement between the shards to not settle on the same planet, possibly even within the same system, but basically to not interfere with each other. Of course, we know that a bunch of shards did.
Yeah, that's like all they've done is interfere with one another.
Absolutely. Even the ones that are even the shards that have stayed inside of a single system, like autonomy on Taldane, they're still interfering and getting involved with other shards in other worlds.
Yeah.
Or like, there's something going on with the cognitive realm and being able to move back and forth, and the shards know about that. It's not like they're blind to that type of thing. So there's all this type of interference among all the shards that we know of, but this author of the letter sees that as a violation of their original pact or their original agreement. And so it leads me to believe that this might be the Dragon Frost that we originally speculated was possibly one of the authors of the first letter from Way of Kings.
I mean, I would say that's like a good call, but I think this letter, the voice is different. Like, I feel like even though the one that we think is from Frost disagreed with Hoid, he still spoke to Hoid in a sort of friendly way, you know, like you would disagreeing with a friend. Rather, this new letter, I think, sounds much more strict and stern towards Hoid.
I agree with that interpretation. I am mainly trying to get at the almost like a third party.
Yeah, the isolationism is the same.
Yeah.
So, and I mean, it sounds like this person was also part of the group that decided together and like figured out how to shatter Adonalsium and figured out what they were going to do with it, right? Like, I get the impression that there was a group of people who like engineered this whole thing. So I do get the impression that this person is from that group.
If we continue with the letter, we also get mention of another vessel. So the next line is,
as for Yuli Da, it was obvious from the outset that she was going to be a problem. Good riddance.
And Ulida is the vessel's name of the shard Ambition.
Yes.
Well, is Ambition one of the shards that has been killed?
Yep.
On which planet? Or what system?
I believe it's Threnody.
Okay, that's what I thought too. And there's something going on there where it's possible that parts of the shard's power were pushed off of Threnody, like into like a secondary planet or something.
There was like a big cosmic battle there. So Ambition was in the system. I'm not sure if she was actually on Threnody, but in the system there's, I believe, 3 habitable planets there. And Odium came and they had sort of like an epic battle in the space around the planets, which creates the unique investiture situation that we see in that system.
And the final bit of this letter, regardless, this is not your concern. You turned your back on divinity. If Reza becomes an issue, he will be dealt with, and so will you.
So just everything in this letter is such a cavalier, carefree reaction to all of these big things in the Cosmere that we're used to thinking of as significant.
So what about the concept that this is the shard autonomy? This is Bavadin. This is the one who we have speculated possibly could be attacking Scadrial, and there's the red mist that and the red corruption that's seen with like Trell on Scadrial.
I think the Bavadin theory is actually for the next letter.
Oh no, I know that. I'm saying they're wrong. I think this could be Bavadin or Bavadin.
Oh, you think?
Well, because isolationist kind of makes sense. Taldane is where autonomy is located, which is one of the planets that only has one shard.
Keeping it really isolated.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know.
And kind of the anger. Like the...
Yeah, but I think, and this could just be my interpretation, but my impression is that the relationship between Bavadin and Hoid has so much animosity that they would not be writing letters at all. Or that it would be much more inflammatory than this one is. Like, this letter is dismissive, but it's not, like, angry or mean or rude necessarily, you know?
Yeah, and I guess the beginning of the letter when it talks about noticing the letter's arrival and the intrusions upon the land, wouldn't have been taken so kindly by autonomy to Hoid. Maybe more like,
yeah, exactly.
Right.
Like, it's dismissive, but it's not angry. It's just like, you're annoying. Go away. Stop being dumb.
So that was just one speculation. I just got whole reams of speculation, letter after letter. But a possible other, because I'm just trying to think of where are there shards in the Cosmere that are isolated, not part of a 2-shard system or anything like that. And so we know that there's one other shard that Brandon has said, we don't know the name of it, but Brandon has said it just wants to hide and survive. And so maybe that shard could be responsible for this first letter, or possibly even the second letter that we're about to get to.
Yeah, I think it's possible. Although I get the impression from that shard would like not be in contact with anyone. And especially in this second letter, I get the impression that there is sort of like a governing body or a congregation of some kind. Let's read the second one.
Okay, let's definitely go into the second one. Do you want to start it off?
Yeah. Letter number 2 begins, Cephandrius, bearer of the first gem.
And we have to stop right there. What the heck is the first gem?
Well, there are several references to Hoid being in possession of a gemstone or a rock of some kind, a crystal. This has been referenced a few times.
And it may be possible that the first gem that is being referenced is somehow connected to Adonalsium before it was shattered. I just have no real idea or real like information about what this first gem is.
What it makes me think of is that flaky pink crystal that Mraize has. I don't know if they're actually connected at all, but that's just what it makes me think of. But yeah, I think this is just like 100% total mystery that will be revealed later.
It could also be some type of aspect of investiture from Yolen, because we do know that he has an original type of light weaving from Yolen. So I think that maybe that could be the source of investiture there.
Yeah, I was thinking that too, that it could be a part of some gemstone or like mineral based magic system that we haven't seen yet. The letter continues on. You must know better than to approach us by relying upon presumption of past relationship. So
obviously a author of this letter who has previously dealt with Hoid, as it seems most had interactions.
Yeah, definitely. You have spoken to one who cannot respond. We, instead, will take your communication to us, though we know not how you located us upon this world.
And so this is what you were mentioning about some type of congregation or collection or representatives of a shard. It says, you have spoken to one who cannot respond. So obviously Hoid was trying to contact, but then these people or this entity with kind of a diverse... Okay, so here's kind of what I'm thinking. We know that like the Amiens from Rashar are made up of Kremlings, and they can
the
send...
Dacian Amiens.
Yes, the Dacian are two different types. But the Dacian Amiens can kind of throw their Kremlings out into the world, and they operate independently. I kind of see that in this response of like a type of super organism or something.
Yeah, like a hive mind, horde type of thing. Yeah, because the grammar of it is interesting in that they seem to be using first person plural as like speaking singular as well as speaking about a group.
Yeah, and that kind of seems to be normally done in a hive mind circumstance. So
right.
Maybe the shard has diversified itself from one vessel to multiples, or... I
don't know. I'm like really thinking that this is possibly a group or like a governing body that exists on Yolen. Like not necessarily a shard, but like part of the group that the original vessels came from.
I think that's interesting, but I don't know why we would expect that much depth when it seems like what Hoid did at some point before these letters were written is that he reached out to other shards in warning.
But why does that have to be just shards? Like, the shards came after an existing civilization, like after Hoid's, wherever Hoid came from, after Adonalsium, you know?
I know, I think the shattering destroyed that. And Hoid is like the last. I mean,
it's possible, but if this group of people had enough like intelligence and power to shatter Adonalsium, do you think they wouldn't like preserve themselves?
It does say that they thought that they were well hidden, which kind of hints at that idea. But then let's continue, because this letter gets more interesting as well. We are indeed intrigued, for we thought it well hidden, insignificant among our many realms. As the waves of the sea must continue to surge, so must our will continue resolute, alone. First reference to the sea, the ocean. There will be another in just a moment from this letter. So obviously these people are maybe based underwater, or are kind of like an Atlantis type of situation. Maybe a city that was above was sunken on purpose as like protection.
Yeah, and what do they mean by this world is insignificant among our many realms? Like, not 3 realms, but many. We know of 3 realms. Like, what does that mean?
I think primarily they're talking about physical, like, realm of control, and not the 3 different realms of physical, cognitive, and spiritual. I could be wrong, but it's possible that if there was some type of hive mind circumstance, then anywhere that an entity of the hive mind was present, it would consider itself like in control of that space or that area. So they could be on many different planets or in many different systems and consider all of those like part of their empire, their realm.
Yeah, definitely. And then, okay, letter continues on. Did you expect anything else from us? We need not suffer the interference of another. Reza is contained, and we care not for his prison. We indeed admire his initiative. Perhaps if you had approached the correct one of us with your plea, it would have found favorable audience.
Now, I find that interesting as well, the concept of approaching the correct one of us.
Yeah. Well, and it sounds like Hoid attempted to contact one who he felt would be sympathetic, and for whatever reason, his communication sort of fell into the wrong hands, and they were like, yeah, you thought you could get away with this by, like, contacting the one that you thought was the weak link? Like, too bad.
Continuing, but we stand in the sea, pleased with our domains. Leave us alone. We also instruct that you should not return to Obradai. We have claimed that world, and a new avatar of our being is beginning to manifest there. She is young yet, and as a precaution, she has been instilled with an intense and overpowering dislike of you.
See, and this is really what makes me think that this group is like even older and not necessarily more powerful, but in some way above the shards. Like, if they're able to select a vessel for a shard and, you know, install it, that says something new to me.
Well, and we should explain the word of Brandon that references this passage specifically. So on Oathbringer release day, November 14th or something, there was many different signings and whatnot. Brandon, traveling all around the country, and people often ask him questions. And at one of those signings, Brandon was specifically asked about this letter, and his response was shocking.
Super shocking. If you read the transcript, it's literally like entire room falls silent in shock, and then someone just like stammers like are you saying what I think you're saying? But basically he tells us that this new avatar is likely the island of Patji on the planet First of the Sun, which appears in the short story Sixth of the Dusk.
So Brandon has kind of given soft confirmation that this is a shard, not necessarily a new shard, but this is a shard, and the vessel of that shard is an island called Patji.
Yeah, and Sixth of the Dusk is really interesting, I think, but this island Patji, the people who live on Sixth of the Dusk reference it as sort of the father of all of their islands, and it's supposed to be the most hostile. So it has like tons of deadly animals that live on it. The jungle is sort of alive and tries to kill any human that trespasses on its shore. It's this very hostile environment. And Sixth of the Dusk is meant to be set quite late in the Cosmere timeline. So after, I believe, after Mistborn era 4, so like Space Age. So Patji would be the older version of this shard that we hear referenced in the letter as being brand new.
And this type of speculation about a vessel being a physical location, an island itself, it's the first time that we've had direct confirmation of any type of thing. But if you go back and listen to our speculation about the planet of Cell, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where you have the destruction of the two shards and their power, a lot of it being forced into the cognitive realm.
Yeah, and then the land achieving sentience.
Yes, and so our speculation was that it would be conceivable that over enough time, the new vessel of ambition devotion and dominion on Cell became the planet Cell.
Yeah.
And that type of soft speculation by us is now given at least a little bit more credit with Brandon's confirmation that yes, an island can be a shard.
Yeah.
So if an island can be, why can't a whole planet be?
So
much stuff.
interesting. I know. See, but this also, like, just these letters together give me the impression that there's, again, some kind of group of people who are like using the shards as tools to like take over the Cosmere.
Let's finish out this letter and then go to the easiest and nicest one.
Okay. Okay, continuing on at the end here. This is all we will say at this time. If you wish more, seek these waters in person and overcome the tests we have created. Only in this will you earn our respect.
So we definitely know that this author is based on a planet with a lot of water and could be some type of underwater civilization, which we have not seen anywhere in the Cosmere.
Well, and I think they could even be on First of the Sun, and it could be that the tests they have created, since they say that they have instilled the shard, which is an island, with a specific hatred of Hoid, it could be that he has to like brave all of those horrible hostile things on Patji.
The only type of kind of resistance to that, and it could be mistaken, but if you read the line before where it says we instruct you that you should not return to Oberdai, which could be their name for the planet Sixth of the Dusk.
Yeah, that's the only way that works.
But it says we have claimed that world, implying that they are on a different world to start.
Yeah,
so
I guess
it's unlikely that they are both saying you can come here to take the test in our waters, but also referencing that world that they have claimed over there being
Well,
Oberdai.
They say we've claimed that world, but then they say seek these waters. That could go either way. Obviously, we don't know for sure.
Alrighty.
Going on to the next letter, which is definitely the most clear cut. It begins, Friend, your letter is most intriguing, even revelatory. I would have thought, before attaining my current station, that a deity could not be surprised. Obviously, that is not true. I can be surprised. I can perhaps even be naive, I think. I am the least equipped of all to aid you in this endeavor. I am finding that the powers I hold are in such conflict that the most simple of actions can be difficult.
And these kind of hints that we've got so far in this letter, the idea that before I attain my current station, I would have thought a deity could not be surprised, implies that the person relatively recently became a deity and spent some time before who was not a deity, and that's
not one of the original vessels.
Yeah, and doesn't refer to him as Cephandrius, but instead as friend. So our likely author of this letter is Zazed, the Shard of Harmony, or I guess calling him the Shard of Harmony is not quite accurate. He is technically a vessel that is holding both of the shards, Ruin and Preservation, and they have started to maybe merge into one, but it's not complete.
I don't know, because we have a word of Brandon that if Zazed was to drop his power, what would fall would not be Ruin and Preservation, but it would be a single Shard of Harmony.
So I think that his difficulty of finding the powers I hold are in such conflict that the most simple of actions can be difficult is really seen in Mistborn Era 2. It's basically the entire motivation for Wax's anger at Harmony. He basically continually attacks Harmony, who he only knows as God, because of a lack of action on Harmony.
Yeah, he's like, why aren't you doing anything? Everything is horrible. Like, why aren't you fixing it? Isn't this supposed to be your job? And Zazed is kind of like, dude, you have no idea how difficult it is to be Harmony, to bring balance to everything.
And I think that in this letter, we're kind of given further example that Zazed is really struggling as Harmony to take action or to make significant moves. He might be in conflict between the intent of the shard or the shards and his own personal belief as Zazed the mortal, or he could just really be having an inability to make any decision because the two shards are opposites. And he, as far as we know, at this moment at least, Zazed is the first one to hold two different shards. I don't think we've seen that. Maybe Odium did something like take power. We've kind of speculated about, like become more powerful with each one he kills, but we haven't had any confirmation of that.
Yeah, well, and even if that was the case, he wouldn't be actually holding two different shards. I think Zazed is definitely the only one that we know of. The letter continues on. I am also made uncertain by your subterfuge. Why have you not made yourself known to me before this? How is it that you can hide? Who are you truly, and how do you know so much about Adonalsium? If you would speak to me further, I request open honesty. Return to my lands, approach my servants, and I will see what I can do for your quest.
So this is definitely the only letter that has any type of positive response to Hoid, even though there's wariness, uncertainty. There's also definitely a willingness to work with Hoid, and further confirmation. Zazed refers to the Khandra as his servants in Mistborn Era 2, and they refer to themselves as Harmony's servants. So we're pretty confident about letter 3's author being Hoid, and the first 2 letters are much more speculative.
Yeah, letter 3's author is Sazed to Hoid. Speaking of Hoid, let's talk about everything we learned about Hoid.
Because there was a bunch. Outside of the epigraphs, Hoid just made a bunch of appearances in the book.
He just talks so much about himself. It was just like a gold mine.
Yeah, and it's never happened in such a direct way. The only thing we've had from Hoid that was really like revelatory and like the Cosmere nerds really focused on were the stories that he would tell, sometimes using types of light weaving, the Yolish light weaving, we believe, with Kaladin out on the plains and stuff. But it was always like metaphor and story, and like maybe you can use a couple of these things as a hint to my true purposes.
Yeah, and these very like veiled, avoiding comments. Like he never gave a straight answer about like who he is or what he's doing or anything like that. It was always very secretive and mysterious. And then in this book, he's just like, oh yeah, by the way, here's like a bunch of information about me.
And so we're just going to read a bunch of quotes from Hoid that kind of confirm different aspects of his personality or identity. And let's start with his description of himself and, kind of his own personal identity. Again, he could be totally full of shit, but this just seems like the most honest we've seen Hoid.
Yeah, absolutely. He describes himself, quote, "I am the bones of a foreign species left drying on the plain that was once, long ago, a sea. A curiosity, perhaps a reminder, that all has not always been as it is now." End quote.
Just the concept of this quote along with the one when he references his age. I want to jump down to that. Shallan asks Hoid if he's a herald because, they're interested in finding the heralds. And he chuckles and says, quote, "Child, when they were but babes, I had already lived dozens of lifetimes." End quote. Now that heralds for the people in modern Rashar are at minimum 5,000 years old. We know that between the early desolations there were hundreds of years, and between the later desolations there were just a couple of years. So easily, and the last desolation was 4,500 years ago, so it's easily over 5,000 years that the heralds would be. Hoid is saying that when they were mortals, children, he had already lived dozens of lifetimes. And then his description of being the bones of a foreign species left drying in a lake bed that was once long ago.
It just conjures up this image of unfathomable time. And he's like this fossil of something that we can't even comprehend.
It is always so interesting, too, when you see or experience characters with abnormally long lives compared to, regular lives of the mortal characters. It introduces such a interesting concept regarding that character's backstory and their history and how they see current events. I think that there are obviously lots of examples of this throughout the literature or film world, but I always find it very interesting when you have one character or a couple characters who are ancients compared to, Hoid is basically saying I'm older than the entire history of the humanity of Rashar.
Yeah, that's what's crazy, because the timeline on Rashar is so long. If you just take, the desolations to now, that's long enough. And then he just adds thousands and thousands of years on top of that.
I'm pretty sure that this is, complete confirmation, or all the confirmation along with the other evidence that we have, that Hoid is definitely one of or the oldest person in the Cosmere.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, doesn't he make a comment like that about cultivation also?
Yeah, I think it's something like Kaladin asks, like, have you met anyone or like any
Yeah.
woman that you're looking at? And he says something like, there's only one person on this planet that is in my age bracket, and she's a little young for my taste, or something like that.
Yeah. There's another super interesting quote from Pattern about Hoid. So Hoid leaves from his interaction with Shallan. They like sit down and have dinner. He leaves, and she asks Pattern, "Do you know anything about Wit?" And Pattern says, "No. He feels like one of us."
And just that line alone, he feels like one of us, gives the question of like,
what does that mean?
Yeah, one of us what? Like, okay, Pattern's a Spren.
Yeah.
So does Hoid feel like a Spren? Pattern's a cryptic specifically. So does Hoid feel like a cryptic who lies or likes lies? A Lightweaver.
Yeah, he is a storyteller. So cryptic or Lightweaver kind of goes along with that.
Absolutely. Is he a surge binder? He's kind of talking about us as in like me and you, Shallan, like we're a team. And so it just introduces all these questions of like,
what?
And it kind of gives me pause and makes me think, what would Pattern feel if he saw Kelsier? What would Pattern feel if he saw Kelsier after Kelsier dies,
right,
in Secret History? Stay with me for this one. We have Kelsier, who dies in Mistborn Era 1. Mistborn Secret History, he's a cognitive shadow Kelsier, okay, only existing in the cognitive realm. But then, by Mistborn Era 2, Kelsier is the...
Splinter? No, Sliver.
Well, he is a sliver because he held the power of a shard and then let it go, but he is not currently a sliver. He is instead a physical entity in Mistborn Era 2 that the people of Southern Scadrial confuse for the Lord Ruler. And most likely the creator and or person who found the Bands of Mourning and put them up on that Wax and Wayne go chasing in that plot story. So what would Pattern, a Spren, think about Kelsier as a cognitive shadow? And then what would Pattern think about Kelsier as the Mistborn Era 2 kind of physical entity when he is re-emerged back in? And then so here's my speculation. What if Sephandrius died, became a cognitive shadow like Kelsier, and then figured out, like Kelsier, a way back into the physical realm? And this gives a hint at why Hoid is so good at world hopping, is because he might have spent hundreds or thousands of years
anyway
in the cognitive realm, like figuring out all the mysteries of it. And then it could also partially explain his ability to not dilate time, but to kind of move through time without experiencing all of time. So I don't know. This is all just speculation.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an interesting thought. But then I think also all of this sort of goes towards the theory that we started putting up in the last Hoid episode that went super meta about Hoid sort of being a fictional character.
Hoid recognizing that he is a fictional character.
Yeah, so like this idea...
pulled himself from the page, or pulled himself out of Brandon's head, and became the first character that Brandon really latched onto. And I think that on the meta level, there's something there, but I don't know what it is specifically.
Well, I just think if we're thinking he exists significantly in the cognitive realm, like what else can you say about a character? You know what I mean? They exist in the cognitive realm. And then we have some more stuff in here that sort of speaks towards another quote from Brandon that we have about how Hoid sometimes shows up places and nothing is going on. And so he just leaves. Nothing like bookworthy is happening. And he has a few quotes sort of towards this point. For one, quote, "When I was young," he said.
Yes.
"I made a vow."
Shallan nodded, wide-eyed.
"I said I'd always be there when I was needed."
"And you have been?"
Yes.
She breathed out.
It turns out I should have been more specific, as there is technically anywhere. To be honest, there has so far been a random location that is of absolutely no use to anyone. I can know where I'm supposed to be, Shalon, but not always what I'm supposed to do there.
And so we had this earlier word of Brandon and this earlier speculation that Hoid was popping in and out of the cognitive realm or showing up random places in the Cosmere because he was needed or something. He would look around and realize nothing book-worthy was going on, and that's the actual quote from the word of Brandon, and then go somewhere else. And so, yeah, I definitely think there's a meta
like literally,
aspect.
Yeah, talking about that. Like, sometimes I show up and I'm just like, I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to be doing here. Okay, bye.
And I don't know how deep we want to dive into the meta rabbit hole that could be Hoid, because I think that it's fun to speculate, and I honestly do think that there is something meta going on with Hoid, but at the same time, it could just be like one of those fun things that an author does and plays with, but is not meant to be the full aspect of the character.
Yeah, which I would prefer, to be honest. I think that idea is a little bit too meta for me, but I just thought it was interesting that there was so many quotes in Oathbringer that like really spoke towards that idea. But I also think we see sort of a different, like, tender, heroic side of Hoid, that he made this vow to always be there when he was needed. Like, it's so sweet, and I think it tells us so much about who he is and what he's doing.
Well, and there is definitely remember his name Hoid comes from what his own quote, Hoid is another name that I stole from someone I should have loved. So it's possible that maybe the someone he should have loved died, and then he made a promise to always be there when he was needed, but didn't specify where there was.
Speaking also to Hoid's sort of purpose or philosophy and what he's doing in the Cosmere, when he's speaking to Shalon, he starts talking about 3 different kinds of people, because she's talking about how she wants to have the power to change things and to make a difference, and he says, there's some people who just step to the side of the boulder and just let the boulder destroy everything, and then they pick up the power when it's gone. Or there are people who like try to shove the boulder and they try to move it in the way they want it to go. And then he says,
quote, "There is, but they are oh so rare. These know they can't stop the boulder, so they walk beside it, study it, and bide their time. Then they shove it, ever so slightly, to create a deviation in its path." End quote.
And I think he's talking about himself there. I think that is like his philosophy, and what he's doing in the Cosmere is like watching everything and then very sort of slowly and quietly making a little move just to nudge things more towards the way he wants them to go.
And I think that we can really see this in Mistborn Era 2 when and basically all of his interactions, but Mistborn Era 2, his involvement with Wax, he gives him a coin that basically launches the entire exploration of the plot into the Southern Scadrians and the Fabrials.
And the identity of, quote, the Lord Ruler.
Yes. And so all of that is because of Hoid, and you can just imagine Hoid was walking along in Scadrial, looking at the boulder as it moved, and then just made one gigantic push against the boulder, and all he did was just like nudge it ever so slightly with this coin introduced to Wax.
Right. Such a small decision. Like, he's not making any big moves. He didn't assassinate anyone. He's not overturning civilizations. All he did was give a coin to one person. And yet, that tiny interaction is going to change everything.
There's a couple of kind of juicy tidbits, and we mentioned this in our last episode, that Hoid gives to the characters. specifically Shallan, when he says, "Be wary of anyone who claims to be able to see the future, Shallan."
And he says that twice in quick succession, like very intensely, which just really jumped out at me.
And so last week we speculated I speculated that the reason for this insistence to be wary of anyone who could claim to see the future is because Moalak, the unmade, that gives a little bit of future sight in the form of the death rattles and maybe in other forms as well. But my theory was that unmade was kind of like blocking the spirit realm, or any type of future sight would go through Moalak, and Moalak was corrupted and unmade now. So you don't want to go through Moalak because he could be, or maybe not he, but the Force could be messing with future sight and giving incorrect things. I think we see this in the diagram. Most importantly is that Taravangian is so convinced that his diagram is perfect and he created in this moment of like epic genius, but then throughout, really in Words of Radiance, but really into Oathbringer as well, we see more and more that the diagram was wrong and that Taravangian has been trying to edit the diagram in like key ways when he was not a super genius. He was like really genius, and so he felt really confident about himself. And they're looking at the death rattles. There's people that worked for Taravangian that were like, I don't think you're interpreting the diagram right, and tried to go off and do their own thing. So like, I think that idea of the diagram being corrupted is also an aspect of this incorrect future sight, maybe because of Moalak's corruption.
Well, we see a lot that people who see the future like end up being wrong or see something that is not entirely correct. So I do think there's something to that, of just the idea of like, don't trust your future sight because you're not seeing everything, because the future is constantly changing. And I don't think we've really seen any examples on Rashar of something like Atium on Scadrial where you see sort of all possible futures. They seem to just see one picture, and then it's understandable to see how that could be wrong.
And to be honest, Hoid could definitely know what it is like to have the power of a shard, and to understand that type of real future sight where it is an infinite number of possible futures. And so what he's just kind of basically pointing out is you're going to get one, and that's one of an infinite number of possibilities. So You're just too dumb. Like, maybe it's not a dangerous thing. Maybe it's literally just like, you're too dumb to understand future sight. So stop trying, or don't listen to anybody who says it because they're too dumb.
Yeah, for sure.
But it kind of seems with his intensity that there was danger behind it. And so that's why I look at Moalak as possible, a corrupting force on future sight on Rashar.
There's another quote from Hoid. He's talking to Shallan about the cult of Spren in Kholinar, and he says, quote, "The cult reminds me of a group I knew long ago, equally dangerous, equally foolish," end quote. And that to me is like backing up my idea of this like governing group of people that possibly engineered the shattering and is now like manipulating the shards.
I definitely think that that's the best support of your theory. And I think that the idea that Hoid would be referencing any type of smaller cult, or even like, the people from Silverlight or the people from the Eyrie, like it just doesn't make sense that he would care about them as much.
Plus he says a group I knew long ago. And if Hoid says long ago, it's a long time. Another thing I thought was interesting is that when talking about, I believe it was the Oath Gates, he says the Spren of the Fabrial won't obey me. Which was like, wait, do other Spren obey you? Like, is he just going around ordering Spren around? Like, what power is that?
Wait, he's specifically talking about that in regards to the Oathgate?
I believe so.
But the Oathgate isn't being guarded by Spren, it's being guarded by the Unmade, I thought.
But remember, there's the big spren that control it, and the reason they end up in Shadesmar is because Ja-Anat was forced to corrupt the 2 spren that are guarding the gate, and so it won't go to the correct place.
Got you. Okay, remember now. I think the only other kind of thing to mention about Hoid from Oathbringer is his ability to enhance or supplement the light weaving that was done by Shallan in her story of the girl who looked up, about the young girl who lives in a town surrounded by the massive wall, and she keeps trying to find out why the wall is there and why nobody does anything about her. Goes to the other side. She eventually climbs the wall and she finds stormlight, she finds spheres, and she brings that back. And Hoid, in the second telling, I believe the chapter is called The Girl Who Stood Up, and it's at Shallan's low point. Shallan is telling the story through light weaving, and both she recognizes that she is not the only one doing this, or that it is superior to her previous light weaving, but the way that it is kind of described is that, normally she can make images appear and you kind of see them as maybe holograms or like augmented reality on top of the actual physical world. But then when she's telling the story with Hoid present, it is as if the walls of the room fall aside and then they are surrounded. So it goes from like augmented reality to virtual reality to kind of stay in the same type of realm. Is like she begins with this like ability of light weaving where she crafts the images and they're kind of dancing around on top of the physical world. And then Hoid shows up and it's like they enter into the world. They become part of the story, and the expanse of the world is seen in a way that's much more detailed than she's ever done before.
Well, I think that's the first time also that she's able to touch one of her creations, and she goes on to do that in the final battle. But I believe the first time is with Hoid that she even like thinks of the idea that it might be possible for her creations to have a physical presence that she can touch and it's solid like a normal human would be.
So again, with this speculation of Hoid's philosophy of like nudging things in the appropriate direction, it's entirely possible that Shallan needs that moment with Hoid to then be so triumphant in the final battle with her. She basically creates an army and gives them the physical ability to withstand some of the blows, not just be images, but to actually have some physical
presence.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we got a lot of good info and theories into this episode.
So much speculation.
I know,
I think
lots of speculation.
Hoid is the most speculative of characters.
Yeah, absolutely.
And he just introduced such mystery into the Cosmere, and that's why we love Hoid.
Yeah, I mean, he will be plenty of fodder for imagination in our Cosmere dark times.
We hope that you keep finding the light and download some Cosmere conversations.
Let us know what you think about Hoid and the letters.
Absolutely. Find us on Twitter or the Reddit, Cosmere Convo.
Facebook.
Yep, we're everywhere. Thank you all so much. Really appreciate if you continue to share. Shout out to Pennsylvania. We got some listener feedback from there, and I noticed the uptick in listenership in Pennsylvania. So big shout out there. And first listener from Mongolia. Thanks, Mongolian listener.
Hey. Welcome.
Yeah, exactly. I'll just give shout outs to like random single individuals throughout planet Earth.
Until next time. Life before death.
Strength before weakness.
Journey before destination.